Hey guys, I hope you all had a great holiday. I'm doing a movie review, and the movie I want to review is the 2023 comedy drama, The Holdovers, which was one of my favorite films of that year. Now, the film was directed by Alexander Payne, who also directed films like Election, Sideways, The Descendants, and Downsizing, and it was written by David Hemingson. Now, I do want to point out that the film has had a plagiarism accusation leveled against it by writer Simon Stevenson, although Payne has completely denied Stevenson's claims. If those allegations are true, that is disappointing, especially because I do think Hemingson's script is quite brilliant. But leaving that aside, I think The Holdovers is an amazing film. It's funny, but also touching and moving, and at points, brutally honest. It's a film that I'm going to try to make a point to watch every holiday season, even though I know Alexander Payne resents people calling this a Christmas movie. But look, if you don't want your movie being called a Christmas movie, then don't set the damn thing around the holiday season. If Die Hard is a Christmas movie, then so is The Holdovers. Now, The Holdovers is set in 1970 at an all-boys boarding school called Barton Academy, and we follow this curmudgeonly professor named Paul Hunnam, who is very strict and very hard on his students, and pretty much all the students at Barton hate him, and it turns out even some of the other teachers don't like him either. But Hunnam gets tasked with watching over a group of students who have been left behind by their families over the holiday break. One of these students being a young man named Angus Tully, who got left behind because his mother canceled a family trip in order to have a honeymoon with her new husband, who Angus despises. And despite these boys getting left behind on Christmas, Hunnam does not go easy on them. But something ends up happening, and the other boys, except for Angus, are allowed to leave, leaving Angus pretty much alone at Barton with Hunnam and the school's head cook, Mary, who recently lost her son in Vietnam. And over the course of the film, we see these people who at first don't really like each other start to understand each other, and a bond and maybe even a friendship starts to develop between them. The film stars Paul Giamatti as Paul Hunnam, a freaking fantastic performance. I actually think Giamatti is a pretty underrated actor. Now, Hunnam is a jerk, but he's principled, and that's something that the other teachers at Barton are shown to not be. And while he is strict, a case could be made that he is trying to prepare these students for the real world. But one of the reasons he resents his students so much is because a lot of them come from rich and politically connected families, and a lot of them are very spoiled and very privileged. The way he sees it, they've had it easy their whole lives, so why should he go easy on them? But as Mary points out to him at one point, he doesn't know that for sure. He's just assuming that. And I think one of the main points of the movie is you don't know what somebody else is going through, and as we come to learn over the course of the story, Paul does have his own reasons for being an asshole. He was screwed over in the past, and while the movie doesn't lean too heavily into this, it is implied at one point that he came from an abusive household growing up. But while Paul is an asshole, he's also funny as shit. Like, there's the scene towards the beginning when he hands out grades. There's this one student named Coons who is a complete douchebag, and he gets a D on the test, and he just says, "Sir, I don't understand." And Hunnam responds with, "That's glaringly apparent." And the kid says, "No, I mean, I can't fail this class." And Hunnam just says, "Oh, don't sell yourself short, Mr. Coons. I truly believe that you can." There's a lot of great sarcastic dialogue like that. You also have Dominic Sessa as Tully, and my god, he gave an outstanding performance, especially with this being his first movie. Apparently, he was the top student of his school's drama department, and Alexander Payne, or the casting director, just kind of discovered him, and thank God they did, because I will be very surprised if this guy is not a bigger name in Hollywood in the next 5 to 10 years. And he plays Tully with such a raw, emotional vulnerability, but much like Paul Giamatti, He's also fucking hilarious. He has some great sarcastic quips directed at either Coons, who is his chief rival in the film, or at Huddam. And much like Huddam, Tully is an asshole, and at times he can be an entitled brat. But as the movie goes on, we start to understand why. And we realize that he has a lot of emotional problems, and also has a very troubled past. And he's also shown to be a very compassionate person. There's a really touching scene towards the beginning where he's comforting this kid who's an immigrant from South Korea who's crying because he wet the bed. It's also implied that his family has a history of mental illness, especially when a certain revelation about his father is revealed, and it leaves you to wonder what will become of Tully when he reaches his father's age, or when he reaches Paul's age. We also learn that he's dealing with depression, and there's a really interesting moment when Paul accidentally discovers some of Tully's medication for depression, and we learn that Paul is taking the same medication. And we gotta remember, the 70s was a time when mental illness was not really taken as seriously as it is now. You also have Divine Joy Randolph as Mary, another outstanding performance. She actually won the Oscar for this role at this year's Academy Awards. Like I said earlier, her son dies shortly before the events of the film, and a lot of the movie is about her processing her grief. But what the movie really does show is that grief is fluid. Sometimes grief can hit you at the most awkward times. Like, there's a scene at a Christmas party where she gets drunk and starts listening to a song that her and her son used to listen to a lot, and then she just starts breaking down crying, and again, it's just such a powerful moment in the film. And it handles grief in my opinion, a very realistic way, in a way that's not overly dramatic or overly, and I hate this term, but Oscar baity. To give a little bit of a personal real-life example, my uncle passed away earlier this year, and it hit everybody in the family extremely hard, especially my mother, because it was her brother, and my other uncle, her other brother, he took it hard, but he was a lot more stoic at the funeral. But this past Thanksgiving, my mom brought up something about my uncle, and my other uncle just started breaking down crying and had to leave the room. Once again, in real life, grief hits people in very different ways, and sometimes it comes in waves. Or like my friend Chris Mano, who I've mentioned before, he passed away almost 3 years ago now, and sometimes I do kind of sit up at night, or I look at some of the old videos we did together, and I just think, holy fuck, he really is gone. And again, Divine Joy Randolph and the script captured that so well. And in a way, I feel like the three principal protagonists of this film are all people who are grieving in their own ways. Mary's grieving the family that she lost, whereas Angus is grieving the family who abandoned him. And Paul, while he might not admit it to himself, we do realize that he was never married, and I think in his own way, he's grieving the family that he never had. And again, the script is so freaking brilliant, which is why if the plagiarism accusations against this film are valid, that would be so disappointing, because honestly, if I taught a creative writing course, this is a movie I would like to show students, to show them how you write a really solid, really smartly written script. Like, the film's funny while being just as much a drama as it is a comedy. And the film manages to be touching without being overly melodramatic or sappy. Now, the film is set in the 1970s, and it really does have the look and feel and even pacing of a film that would have came out during this time period. But unlike a lot of these 70s throwback movies, it doesn't shove the decade in your face. Like, there's not an overabundance of 70s music, there's not some stupid-ass joke that was clearly written in 2023 making fun of something in the 1970s. I mean, the soundtrack does have some good, decade-appropriate music, but it doesn't overdo it. Like, don't get me wrong, I love Stranger Things, but that show really does shove the 80s down your throat to a point where it's almost a parody. Like, even my mother, who was a teenager in the 80s, has said, yeah, not even the 80s was this fucking 80s. Like, this film feels very authentic to the 1970s, but again, it's not in your face about it. But while we're on the topic of this being sort of a throwback movie, I did particularly like how the film opens up with the old Universal logo. But I also think the film's backdrop of the Vietnam War is very important. Like I said, Mary, her son, was killed in Vietnam, and Tully, we find out, has been kicked out of several schools, and his mother and stepfather have told him that if he gets kicked out of Barton, he's getting sent to military school, and if that happens, he'll most likely end up in Vietnam. It's important to remember that during this time period, a lot of young men were using education as a way to avoid the draft. In a way, even though they are very different, this did remind me a little bit of Stephen King's Hearts in Atlantis, which is one of his most underrated books. That's a collection of interlocking novellas which are about the Vietnam War, and the titular story of that collection is about a group of young men in college who are basically using college as a way to avoid Vietnam. But again, I cannot recommend this movie enough. I think it deserves all the accolades it's been getting. But I hope you enjoyed this review, and once again, I hope you had a Merry Christmas or Hanukkah, and have a great New Year.